Hello, supervisors. Thank you for joining me today for our Member Hour and Timesheet Supervisor training. It's Bet. I am the Compliance and Operations Manager, and I oversee all of our Promise Fellow policy and operations. And I'm happy to go through timesheets with you today. So I'll just start with some logistics. Supervisors, you'll all get access to Encore during the first week of service. And then timesheets are due on the 1st and 16th of the month. So twice a month, you'll be asked to approve a member's timesheet. Once the member submits their timesheet, you'll get an automated email asking you to approve it. So you don't need to be checking yourself. You'll get prompted to do that. And then once we have the submitted and approved timesheet, we'll be able to pay members. Members do receive their first living allowance about 30 days after their start date. So just keep that in mind in case your member asks you a question. It does take a little while to get that first living allowance, but then it's nice at the end because they'll be done with service and then 2 weeks later get that final living allowance. And timesheets are really important to our program because they serve as a permanent record of a member's service, and that when you are approving a timesheet, that means that you are verifying that all members on a timesheet were served. They're important because, under our grant, we cannot pay a member living allowance without a submitted and approved timesheet. Then additionally, because we're an AmeriCorps program, which is a federally funded program, those member timesheets are proof that AmeriCorps dollars are being used responsibly. So it's really important that as you are reviewing timesheets, you're making sure that they're accurate and correct, and that there is documentation or there's a verification process in place to make sure that all hours were served. Particularly as we are in a more remote world, AmeriCorps has come out with guidance saying that they expect that there are higher levels of fraud going to be happening. And so we need to ensure that programs have a verification process in place. So we're going to talk about the verification process a little later, but keep in mind throughout this entire presentation that you approving a timesheet means that you're verifying that hours were served and that it's an appropriate use of AmeriCorps money. This is what our Encore timesheet system looks like. You'll see that there are these 5 categories that members are able to submit hours under. There are 2 categories of service, 2 training categories, and then a fundraising category. Service is the default category for most hours, and the vast majority of hours are going to be direct service activities, either on-site or supporting distance learning. So it's going to include time developing relationships with students, creating lesson plans, tracking data, implementing service projects, or supporting, before or after school programming. So the bulk of a member's time, their time spent being a caring adult, is a service activity, and so that's what their timesheet's going to show. It also includes activities like the administration pieces of being a Promise Fellow, so attending meetings, answering emails, taking phone calls, all of that. There is no limit to the number of service hours a member can serve. A subcategory of service hours are COVID additional activities. And so these are going to be activities that are in direct response to COVID-19. In April, we added this category to our timesheet, and we have seen that the most popular things that members have been doing food distribution to students and families, or helping connect families to community resources. So an example of that would be like helping a family get internet access so their student can participate in distance learning. The one thing I will say is that if your member is doing any of these activities that are in support of COVID-19, that's great. Just note that all hours have to be supporting either the host site or a nonprofit organization. They cannot count service hours that are providing a benefit for a for-profit organization. So for example, if you're a member, has a part-time job, either at Shipt or Instacart, and are delivering food and doing grocery shopping, they cannot count that time spent as service hours. But if they are delivering food through your school or your organization or through their local church, that would be fine. They could count that as service activities. Later on in the presentation, I'm going to have a list of all of the COVID additional activities that are approved. So keep your eye out for that. But if at any point during the year there comes an activity that you would want your member to participate in that is in direct response to COVID-19, just reach out to us and let us know. It's probably going to be a fine activity and members will be able to support it, but we just want to know about it beforehand to make sure that there aren't any issues. Our next category is training hours. And so this is everything from required alliance trainings to trainings provided by the site. And so any training that you have your staff complete and you also have members complete, for example, a vehicle safety training, members would count as training hours. Any of our kickoff trainings or professional development trainings that we offer throughout the year, those are going to be under service hours. Um, and then this is limited to 20% of total hours served. And our next category is Life After AmeriCorps hours, which is a subcategory of training hours. So members can serve up to a total of 20 hours doing the following activities: resume and cover letter work, career research, informational interviews, professional networking, standardized test prep, scholarship financial aid application, or exploring continued education. Two things that typically come up that members want to be counting as Life After AmeriCorps but don't would be actually interviewing for a job or the test taking time of a standardized test. So if your member is taking the GRE, they cannot count the time spent taking the test, but they would be able to count test prep time. Then our final category is fundraising hours. So members can raise resources directly in support of their service activities, but not for the general operating funds of the organization or to meet the cash match or for CNCS grants. So there are some caveats to what members can be fundraising for, but if it's in support of the projects that they're leading, that's fine. So a good example would be if they're having a bake sale for an after-school activity. Not all sites or members have fundraising activities. Historically, about 5% of our members have participated in fundraising. We think that number might go up this year just because of how much of the world is remote and there might just be more opportunity to participate in fundraising. But if your site doesn't offer it, that's just fine. But we do want you to know that it exists. If your members are going to be participating in fundraising hours, it is limited to 10% of total hours. All right, finally, we've got one more sneaky category of hours, and that is member-initiated hours. So member-initiated hours would be service or training activities that the member independently identifies and pursues that's unassociated to their program or host site or the primary duties of their position. So that's basically if a member comes to you and is looking for more opportunity to serve hours, and they've identified an opportunity that still falls under the Promise Fellow model, they would be able to participate in that and count it for service hours as long as you approve of it. So as long as it's not interfering with your site's needs and what you need the Promise Fellow to be doing, and it falls under the Promise Fellow model, members would be able to count additional activities for service hours. We do have a formal process. So if your member comes to you with any of these ideas, an example would be if your member is looking to, say you're a high school and your member is looking to engage with younger students, and so they are tutoring after school at a elementary or middle school, then you would want to reach out to us to have them complete a member-initiated hours plan, just so we know about it. And so when it comes up on timesheets, we're aware that it's happening and that we make sure it's an appropriate service activity. All right, so now that you know what all the categories are, we can look at what the timesheet descriptions are going to be. So timesheet descriptions should be following the formula of location plus description. So in service hours, if the member is serving on site, they're with you or with a colleague serving together. That would be a way for it to be verified that the activities were completed. All they have to write are on-site service activities. If they're serving remotely, they have to write remote plus a short description of their activities. So our example is remote, data entry, office hours, supporting ninth grade math class. If they're doing a COVID activity, they would write, again, the location and a description. So on-site food distribution. For any training hours or Life After AmeriCorps hours, they have to have a description of what the training or Life After AmeriCorps activity was, and then, of course, the location. So remote alliance, kickoff, on-site ACES training, remote Life After AmeriCorps, updated resume. And then for fundraising, again, it has to have a short description. So on-site grant prospecting. If there's one slide to pay attention to, it would be this one, and that formula of having a location plus a description. Like I mentioned earlier, the Alliance is auditing timesheets. We audit after every pay period, and it saves us time, it saves you time, it saves your member time if, as you're reviewing it, you're making sure that they have these pieces so that they are saying, on-site every time or remote where they need it so that we don't have to go back and ask for those corrections to be made. Yeah, so that gets to my next piece of the importance of reviewing timesheets for common mistakes. So make sure that when you're looking over a timesheet that there is a description listed each day. Weekends don't count. You don't have to have members write any description on weekends or for any days that they regularly have off. So if you have a member who is serving in a 30-hour or 20-hour a week capacity and they regularly have, Tuesdays and Thursdays off, they don't have to write approved time off. But if it's Labor Day and they are generally serving on Mondays, you would want them to write approved time off on Labor Day. You're making sure that hours are in the right category and on the right day. And all timesheets have to have hours in order for us to pay a member. If a member takes a long, 2-week vacation and they serve no hours, unfortunately, we are unable to pay a member. So make sure that doesn't happen and that they are serving at least some hours each pay period. Then you're also verifying that all hours are correct. So again, making sure that they were served in our appropriate service activities. Make sure that the timesheet was submitted after all hours have been served. So a member can't go in on the first of a month and then pre-fill out their timesheet of anticipated hours. The timesheet has to be a reflection of actual hours served. And then make sure that the member is serving in the correct capacity. So they're either serving 40, 30, or 20 hours per week and getting that number of hours. If, as you're reviewing a timesheet and you see that something needs to be corrected, you'll reject the timesheet and add a note that says "See email." The member is going to receive a notification that the timesheet has been rejected. Don't write the reason why you rejected the timesheet in Encore because, again, Encore, that's a permanent record. So Encore it keeps track of supervisor notes if you reject a timesheet. So hopefully you're not rejecting the timesheet for prohibited activities, but if you were, that would remain a permanent record and would be a red flag for an auditor. So simply just say, see email, and then either have an in-person conversation or send an email about the timesheet issue. Generally, it is not going to be a prohibited activity issue. It's going to be because there were missing hours or descriptions, a questionable description, you just don't quite know what they're talking about for a specific day, or hours were off. So just talk to them either in person or over email off of Encore for any corrections. All right, so this is what a filled out timesheet looks like. You'll notice that for each day that hours were served, there is a location, so either remote or on-site. That hours are distributed across the categories appropriately, so days that have both training and service or fundraising and service have split hours, so make sure that that's happening. And again, for that day off when they generally would be serving, that they have a description, so Labor Day approved time off. Okay, so this year we are anticipating more remote service than has ever happened before. And CNCS states that remote service is appropriate only when the activity can be meaningfully supervised and hours verified independently. So, how you're able to meaningfully supervise a member who's serving remotely, it would be consistent check ins and clear expectations. So, set expectations with your member right away at the beginning of the year about what communication looks like and how often you're meeting. Especially at the beginning of the year, we're going to recommend that you meet with your member at least once a week for either a phone call, a video call, or in person meeting just to have that back and forth feedback. And then, of course, support throughout the week through email or text is fine too. Um, but making sure that you are able to have that time at least once a week to check in and make sure that you're getting what you need and they're getting what they need. And then you have to have a documentation system in place to verify that hours were served. So here are some examples of what that documentation system can look like. We don't determine what system you use, you just have to have a system. I will say focus on this list on the written documentation section because that's going to be the healthiest for all of us. It's all of our examples for underwritten documentation can be completed online or digitally, so that's safe and is hopefully the least amount of burden for you and your member. So either after a member serves a remote day, they would be able to email you a summary of what they learned or did. They could provide a written summary of what they did in uh, running agenda notes. So for when you do meet weekly, you'd be able to refer back and see what the member has been doing that past week. There's a Google form that we have modified from a form that the team at Paladin created that is a way for a member to basically keep an online log of the activities that they're doing remotely, and they would be able to share that sheet with you so that you would be able to see online all the activities they're doing. Or if your system if your online virtual system for interacting with students has a way to track someone's attendance or their activity online, that would count as written documentation too. There's other examples, certification of completion or a remote service hours form. These are both examples that have hope for someday having more in-person activities. So if your member attends an in-person training or is doing an in-person activity and they've received a certification of completion, they would be able to submit that to you for verification of those hours served. Or we have a remote service hours form that members could complete. It's essentially a paper log where they write that they've been somewhere and then a third party signs off on it. So the bottom line is that there has to be a paper trail that uh, a member served hours. I think that the easiest way is either going to be that Google form or having a running Google Doc that has the activities that a member is completing. On the first day of service, I'm going to send out an email to you and your member and say, hey team, these are the activities that are blanket approved for serving remotely from the Alliance. And these are all activities that relate to the primary duties of the Promise Fellow position. And there are additional COVID activities that we have approved. So you're going to receive this email on the first day with your member. I would take that as an opportunity to then respond right back to that email to your member and say, hey, yep, like these things you can all do remotely. Additionally, here are things that you can do when you're not serving on site that will count as service hours. And here's how we're going to track on it. And then either insert the Google Doc that they're going to be using, send them that form, which we'll be sending out afterwards that they can use. Just have a way right away on day one that states the activities they can do remotely and how it's going to be verified. Again, because this is so important, we will be collecting all remote hour verification for the first time period. So after the first timesheet, we're going to reach out and ask for that documentation. That ensures that there is a process in place and make sure that member hours are protected. And so we know that that's a lot to ask, but again, it's protecting member hours and make sure that there is an existing system. So later on in the year, we don't have to go back and recreate documentation. It just already exists. All right, that is a ton of information and really detailed information. Well, I appreciate you all, paying attention. I'm taking notes along the way. If you do have questions about timesheets, don't hesitate to reach out. You can contact me at bbenson@mnyouth.net, or my phone number's up there. Happy to answer questions. And thank you so much for your close attention to detail in timesheets. Like I said, we audit often, so the closer that members and supervisors are paying attention to timesheets, the easier it is for us to audit those timesheets and make sure that they're looking good. All right, thanks everyone for your time.